Hello everyone, we're Group 13, Nicole, Kilmore, and Callum. We're going to talk about movie Ode to My Father. Here is our table of contents. So we will first talk about general information about this movie. For the first part, here is the basic introduction. Ode to My Father is a drama film directed by Won Jae-kyun. The film was released in Korean on December 17, 2014, and was shortlisted for the Panoramic Unit of the 1615 Berlin International Film Festival. It tells the story of Deok-soo, who has his own dream to be a captain, but has never lived seriously for himself once, and works hard for his family all his life. The character name of Deok-soo in the film comes from the father of the director, and he said that the film is a very personalist film to express gratitude to his parents. The Korean name of the film title actually refers to the imported goods stores in Busan, which is also related to the store in the movie. The market was gradually formed after the recovering of South Korea in 1945, and a large number of Northern refugees came here to do business. The protagonist of the film settled here and spent all his life after fleeing. And here is a brief introduction to the main roles. Hwang Chong-min as Yoon Deok-soo. His father and sister were separated when they were transported to the source and flee to Busan with other family members. Since then, Deok-soo had to take responsibility of taking care of his family, came to the border area as a minor, and then met his wife Yonja. With the birth of the child, he had to make money in Vietnam and worked for his family all his life. Yoon Jin Kim as Yonja. She is a nurse. When Deok-soo was a minor in the border area, they met and fell in love. Then I'm going to talk about a summary of the plot. At the beginning of the film, young Deok-soo boarded the U.S. rescue ship with his parents and began to flee with his family in order to avoid the war. During the boarding process, his sister was lost due to the crowd. To find her, his father asked Soo to take care of the family like a man. After getting off the ship, his father was unfortunately lost with him too. The family came to the imported store opened by their aunt in Busan. Young Deok-soo dropped it off out of school early, polished shoes, moved goods, and did all kinds of work just to take care of his family. Then he went to West Germany with his childhood friends to make money as a miner. He met Yonja, a Korean girl who was a nurse there, and fell in love with her. After a mining accident, Deok-soo returned to his hometown, held a wedding, and had two sons with Yonja. Deok-soo decided to buy the grocery store his uncle was going to sell so that his father could find him one day. In addition, when his sister reached the age of marriage, she complained about the lack of the decent jewelry, and all this needs money. The poor Dixon hid the university admission offer he had just received and went to Vietnam alone to participate in war logistic support for high wages. During his stay in Vietnam, in order to save a little girl from a foreign country, he was unfortunately hit on his leg by a Vietnam soldier and became a cripple. After returning home again, Deok-soo and his wife ran the shop and began to look for his lost father and sister in TV programs and search program activity. Finally, Deok-soo finds her long-lost sister through a TV show. Towards the end of the film, Deok-soo has become a white-haired old man. In the eyes of others, he is eccentric and grumpy. The old man never mentioned his miserable life to anyone before. At the end of the film, Dexter returned to his room alone and told his father that he had abided by the promise with him, but he actually had a very hard time.
Now, investigations and historical context. The background of this movie is mostly during 1950 to 80s. And in this period, Korea was going through Korean War and had been recovering from aftermath of the war. Korean War, known as 6.25 전쟁 in Korean, was fought between North Korea and South Korea from 1950 to 1953. The war began on 25th June 1950, when North Korea invaded South Korea following clashes along the border and rebellions in South Korea. North Korea was supported by China and the Soviet Union, while South Korea was supported by the United Nations, principally the United States. The fighting ended with an armistice on 27 July 1953. After the war, Korea went through economic development in such ways like 5-year economic development plan and overseas labor. During 1950 to 1980, there were a number of significant incidents. The movie Ode to My Father focuses only on specific parts of Korean modern history. Most parts are true, but it is not enough for people to understand the overall modern Korean history. It is clear that the current Republic of Korea was created at the expense of older generations. However, the sacrifice consisted of a combination of factors such as foreign labors, Middle East construction, labor movement, and democratic movement. The movie removes the parts such as a labor movement or democratic movement and shows modern Korean history romantically.
Several events happened between the 1950s and 1980s. The movie starts with Hungnam evacuation, which is also known as the Miracle of Christmas. The Hungnam evacuation lasted from December 15th to 24th, 1950. After the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, the US and UN armies were stuck in the port of Hungnam, while the Chinese forces were coming to take over the territory. So ships were sent to save the UN armies, but they were not planning to save the refugees. On December 23rd, the biggest ship, Meredith Victory, departed with 14,000 refugees who were sent to the ports of Busan and Jeju Island. Thousands of lives were saved, with no one dying on board, and even babies were born.
The Vietnam War was a conflict in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia from 1st November 1955 to the fall of Saigon on 30th April 1975. It was the second of the Indochina Wars and was officially fought between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. North Vietnam was supported by the Soviet Union, China, and other communist allies. South Vietnam was supported by the United States and other anti-communist allies. The war is widely considered to be a Cold War-era proxy war. It lasted almost 20 years with direct US involvement, ending in 1973. The South Korean government, under the administration of Park Chung-hee, took an active role in the Vietnam War. From September 1964 to March 1973, South Korea sent some 350,000 troops to South Vietnam. The South Korean Army, Marine Corps, Navy, and Air Force all participated as an ally of the United States.
Next is the historical figures. The main characters of this movie are not real figures. However, there are references to real figures who played a role in Korean history and represent the development of Korea. Real figures appear in the scene of the Hungnam evacuation, where a Korean pleads with the American officer to save the Koreans. Almond was an actual senior officer who fought in the Korean War, and Hyun Bong-ak was a doctor who graduated from Severance Medical School. Hyun Bong-ak is known to have saved 98,000 people during the Korean War. There are also other real figures who interact with the main characters and are mentioned later in the movie. For example, Mr. Chung, who told the young Toksu and Taisu that he was going to build Korean cars and ships for international trade, becomes the founder of Hyundai Company and is reminded as the company's success is printed on the newspaper. Lee Man-gi, a famous wrestler who first appears as an elementary school student, reappears on the television after he grows up. Nam Jin, a Korean soldier who Toksu met in the Vietnam War, tells Toksu that he will become a singer, and later on he becomes one of the most famous singers of Toksu's generation. Now let's look at the historical accuracy. Most of the events in the film are true. Miners were recruited and sent as guest workers to West Germany from 1963 to 1980. They had a 3-year visa to stay and work in West Germany. People applied for the high salary and were tested with carrying rice bags. Just like Toksu and Taisu, most of the miners did not have a mining experience before, so many got injured and died. About 65 miners died from an accident or committed suicide. Therefore, after the first round of miners sent to West Germany came back, the requirements changed. The miners no longer had to graduate middle school, and the process looked for those who already had a mining experience. Next is patriotism. There is a scene where the couple, Toksu and Youngja, argue, but they are interrupted with the national anthem, so they get up to face the national flag. In the 1970s, under the military government, the national anthem was played every day at sunset. During this time, people needed to stay still and put their hand on their chest, just like the couple did in this scene. Some of the separated families, like Toksu's, were able to reunite through TV shows. The KBS TV show that reunited families who were separated during the Korean War broadcasted from June 1983 to November 1983. The show inspired many other reunion TV shows that came later. The show was called Finding Dispersed Families and was registered in UNESCO's Memory of the World in 2015. Toksu finds his little sister Baksun through this show. Baksun tells Toksu that she was adopted to the United States. Before there was a legal standard for inter-country adoption in South Korea, many of the children like Baksun, who lost their families during the war, were adopted to the United States.
Historical inaccuracy. It was around 1974 when Doksu and Dalgu went to Vietnam, and the United States military began to withdraw in 1972 and completed its withdrawal in 1973. And the Korean military officially withdrew in March 1973. Nam Jin, who appeared in the movie, had already been discharged from the military in 1971. The production team seems to have known that the United States and Korean troops remained until then, only after seeing that the end of the Vietnam War was in 1975.
And here is our discussion questions. So discussion number 1 is Doksu has lived his life for his family, nearly dying in a mining accident in Germany and losing a leg in Vietnam. In the film, Doksu called with his wife before leaving for Vietnam. He told her that his life was his own, but he had no choice. Do you think he put an invisible chain on himself? This scene also shows the patriotism of the people. Why do you think patriotism was needed at the time? Were individuals needed to sacrifice themselves for the family or society at the time? The answer we discussed for question 1 is it was not long after the war, so it was necessary for the nation to force its people to develop their patriotism. However, most people, including the main character, would have only thought about making money for their families. Since there were limited ways for them to make money, people like the Sioux went abroad to earn money. In such a process, foreign currency flew into Korean, which eventually helped society and the country. Therefore, dedication to the family has had a positive effect on society.
Here is the second discussion question. Poor Toksu does not have enough money to study at an institution, so he sneaks into the classes. When a man from the institution finds this out, he shouts at Toksu that because of people like him, the country is not developing. What do you think were the most important tasks and values the Koreans had at the time? How do you think they viewed themselves? Our teammates think that the most important task was to reconstruct the country from the war. So the Koreans had to be diligent and hardworking. Since the Koreans viewed their country as one that should be developed, they would have thought themselves as inferior and would have wanted to become a country like Germany.
Discussion question 3. When news on the radio came out, the people were confused of whether they could go back to their country in North Korea or whether the war is over. A man comments that the country ended up like this because it does not have power, and that foreign powers can just mess around in the country. How do you think the Koreans viewed the war and reacted to the news? South Koreans would have blamed North Korea for starting a war, and later blamed themselves for China and the United States coming in because of their weak national power. When the radio came out of the scene, Koreans just wanted to go back to their hometowns, as Youngja's first words asked if they could now go back to their hometowns. Here are the sources of our information, and these are the sources of our pictures. Thank you for listening.